Hi, everyone. This is Abhishek Dujari, and I'm going to walk you through how to monitor your Kubernetes-based microservices with Scalyr. So right on my screen, you can see the name of a cluster and a bunch of deployments. So how does this get here? It's actually pretty straightforward. It takes less than a minute. These two commands, copy and paste it to your kubectl that creates a daemon set in your cluster. And from that point onwards, all existing deployments and any new ones that you create will just show up here almost immediately. Okay. So when they do, and it doesn't matter how many clusters, for every cluster, you have to do it once. So once you do that, you will see your cluster name here as a section head. You would see your deployments, the number of instances of that deployment, a couple of shortcuts to get straight to the logs for that deployment, and shortcut for the dashboard. Now, if you've been using labels, they're pretty useful here. So you can create a few of your own labels and be able to filter and search by them. So let's just take a look at a dashboard. So dashboards on Scalyr, there's a few standard ones. As soon as there is data, say for example, well-known formats of system process being monitored, or web access logs, or Kubernetes, the dashboards will show up automatically. They're all customizable. You can create your own. They're just text files, which can be uploaded and downloaded. So at this point, let's just take a look at one of these, say K8s Cube metrics. All right, so let's take a moment to understand this dashboard. So at the top, we have a view to look at all the clusters in aggregate. And we also have a way to look at every deployment individually. So obviously we don't have any instances and other things that are ephemeral because to us, they don't really matter. Down here, we're looking at the time range, and this is dynamic, so you can change it. We'll focus on that specific time range. You can obviously type custom time ranges here, and the dashboards will update automatically. So we have the usual suspects. We have CPU usage, memory, and events. And we see there's some gaps here. Now, this is normal because metrics are typically sampled, and they're rarely the leading indicators of an issue. So what we're really looking for is what caused this. And it's right down here, which is pod restarts. So pod restarts are pretty common. Like, containers restart all the time. They fail all the time. We expect, for the most part, Kubernetes to recover these things. And I don't want to be woken up, frankly, for one or two pod restarts. But I do have a threshold, for example, say 4 or 5, at which point I would mark a pod as failed. So I would want to know about a situation where it's so close to my threshold. Why would that happen? And I would want to know as early as possible. So let's zoom in on this, which says 4. So if I zoom in, all the corresponding graphs update. So not surprising, the metrics is not there, but we do have events that are always being recorded because we have our daemon set with Scalyr running. So that means there is a possibility of finding exactly what happened with events. So let's expand this. So let's just take another moment to look at this interface. And this is pretty simple, and I expanded this for a reason. On the left is all the fields, as you would see in a log search. So these fields are parsed out of the event logs that are coming in from Kubernetes. You could have 1,000 fields, it does not matter, because all these fields become columns in Scalyr. So Scalyr is a columnar database. So these fields are pretty good, pretty useful. So for example, I want to see the reason. The reason is a backoff. So that's definitely worth investigating. It may not be a problem, but it could be. So let's jump straight to the logs. And on top, you can see the filter that was used to actually create the graph. So at any point you have such a filter, you can save this to the dashboard. You can create an alert out of it. You can download the results, or share it over Slack, or copy the link over to someone. So that's all still there. All right, so the fields are still there. We have the time exactly, and it doesn't matter how many Kubernetes events were coming in. You could have hundreds of millions, but on this screen, you will only get exactly what you were looking for. So we see 4 events here. If I were to zoom in on one with inspect fields, I can still see my raw event in its original format. That's always there. So it's never changed by Scalyr. But what we do have is additional fields that is created on Scalyr. So this is all server side. None of this happens on the client side, which is the agent running in your kube environment. So that actually lowers the footprint, the footprint of the agent on that environment. So everything is happening on Scalyr server side. If something is missed, you can just edit the text file that controls this parser, and it will just start working from that point onwards without having to touch your environment. So all these fields are there. You could actually filter by them if you had too many of these lines. Now, if I'm an SRE, I look at this, I kind of understand what's happening, but I may not know much about the application. It could be my app. It may not be my microservice. Now, coming from metrics, this is where investigations would typically end. I would take the timestamp, I know the app name, I know the deployment. I would pass it along and say, go get the pod logs for this specific deployment at this time and see what the problem is. Now, hopefully that's another system that you can get to quickly and get the answers. Well, we don't have to do any of that because we already have the pod logs. All right, so depending on your environment, you may see different options. Thread log and original log are pretty much always there. But in this case, because it's kube, we have the pod log. So let's click into that. And Scalyr uses nanoseconds, so the chances are you're going to land somewhere close to the problem. So here is our event, the restart event. The timeline shows where the problem kind of started over here, right? So the metric says it dropped off here, doesn't say why. The why is over here. There's an application error. And because this is not a recoverable error, it's shutting down the pod. Now, if you've seen how we link request IDs and transaction IDs within Scalyr, you can also link to an external service. So this is linked to GitHub. So if I click on this, it will take me exactly to the line of code from the stack trace. Could be useful to just include in your Jira or whatever else you need to do next. So that's essentially the gist of how you would quickly monitor and troubleshoot every microservice in your cluster. So I'll stop right here to take some questions before moving on.